Hello, BookTube. Yesterday I made a video, kind of a starter kit, a list of suggested books for people who might be interested in reading about the House of Windsor and Queen Elizabeth II. I did it really for myself, a kind of melancholy reflection on the fact that an era has ended, an era that her handlers and PR people very hopefully 70 years ago said would be a new Elizabethan age. I don't think that it ever amounted to that, but it was full of history. It was full of incident, and there were a great many really interesting books. And I thought I'd make a quick list of those yesterday, and I have been bombarded with email responses from all of you saying that you enjoyed that. And I'm not quite ready to let the subject go, so I thought I would make a quick video standing up. I'm not on the fainting couch. I thought I'd make a quick video here at my biography shelf to go over just a few more books dealing with the House of Windsor that I can recommend. Just in case you didn't find the exact right thing in the list yesterday, I thought we'd go over just a few more. The first one is something that we saw. I got it at the Brattle just recently. It's John Wheeler Bennett's biography of King George VI, his life and reign. I had an ugly paperback of this. I found this plain red paperback at the Brattle and got this instead. And I mentioned yesterday that George VI is a bit boring as a monarch. And that is because of decisions that were made by George V and his handlers, that they needed to fundamentally change the nature of the monarchy, or they thought it wouldn't survive, that it had to be almost non-existent, that it had to be just a thing on paper, but no kind of interference with any element of society or government at all, purely team spirit, purely national spirit, purely above the fray, purely non-political in any way. So, for instance, the father of George V would routinely go to Europe and talk with heads of state. He'd routinely write to them, and none of that interaction, most of that interaction, was not overseen by Parliament. So you had Parliament doing all sorts of statecraft, but you also had the King doing all sorts of statecraft on his own. That became, with George V, completely impossible. And it was never his stated intention, and he wouldn't have been able to do it. But it was clearly the stated intention of his handlers and PR people and palace officials to make the monarchs boring, as a way to keep their profile low so that they wouldn't be exiled to a country house and then executed by their own palace guard. I think, well, never mind what I think. It is true that it resulted in some pretty boring monarchs, some fairly constrained constitutional monarchs. As Ben Himlet puts it in his book, The Queen, which I recommended yesterday, he writes in his book that if Queen Elizabeth II had been handed an order for her own execution by her parliament, she would have constitutionally been forced to sign it. I think he was overstating the case, but it was definitely true with George VI. And yet, there is a real benefit to this book. There is a real draw to it because Wheeler Bennett is so beautiful a writer. This is as authorized as an authorized biography gets, but oh my, is it enjoyable to read. So I thought I'd recommend this one. No idea if Wheeler Bennett is still in print or available, but I wanted to show it to you. And then we've got a couple more on this top shelf. There's this one, for instance, which is I had in a UK mass market paperback forever and ever, and then I finally did find the hardcover. This is Peter Townsend's book, The Last Emperor, which is again about George VI, and again an interesting book, despite the fact that the figure at the center of the book is boring. This is about England in the immediate aftermath of World War II. This is about England slowly getting rid of its colonial possessions, or transforming them, overseeing their transformation into autonomous national entities, one way or another. Sometimes the process went peacefully, sometimes it didn't, sometimes it was handled competently, and sometimes it wasn't. In the given moment on social media, I have been unfollowing lots and lots of people who I otherwise respected, and I just can't do it. I can't watch them heap scorn and vitriol on Queen Elizabeth II, or outright joyfully celebrate that this 96-year-old mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother is dead. I'm happy that she's dead. I don't know how many tweets I've seen like that, and that is, regardless of what you think of the monarchy, so unbelievably beyond the pale barbaric that it's been a hard time to glance. I follow Twitter for friends of mine to see what they're doing in their professional and personal lives, so it's been unavoidable for me to see that kind of stuff. So I haven't wanted to inject into that conversation. I've been leaving it, waiting for other people to inject into that conversation. That this book notwithstanding, Queen Elizabeth II oversaw the transition of more people from colonial status to independent status. The sheer number of people. She oversaw that transition for more people than any other single human being in the history of the race, in the history of humanity. But she has been dragged through the mud on Twitter as a colonizer, and this book will hit that nerve too. But if you don't care about that sort of stuff, if you're a normal person, wants to read history, yes, Great Britain had an enormous colonial empire. That's just part of history. This is fascinating. Townsend is really good at balancing all of those imperialistic themes with what amounts to the personality of his central figure. It works. It works in a way that it really shouldn't. And then, believe it or not, despite the fact that I am knocking this guy, I am also going to recommend another George VI book. This is a dual biography. This is by Christopher Warwick, who did a really good job. This is, pardon the shape that this book is in, but this is King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. This is not the Queen Elizabeth who just died, of course. This was George's Queen Consort, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And it's really good. It's a really, really enjoyable dual biography. It's not long, so it's not in depth. I have a feeling that the death of Queen Elizabeth II will flush into the finishing steps process a great many Windsor biographies and Windsor histories. I would hope so. I know of a couple that have been sort of languishing, and I'm hoping that they get greenlit for publication to signify greater public interest. When one of those finally reaches the press, it will outdo this completely. It's exactly this book, only at 800 pages, and with a whole lot more detail. But this one was really enjoyable. And there's the Queen Mother on the back cover there. So I believe that is the last George VI biography. Then we will deal with people who are considerably more interesting. Like, for instance, this paperback of Craig Brown's book, 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret, which is, just as the title implies, sort of sorry for all the reviews stuck in it. It's sort of fragmentary and refractory, but really, really interesting for all that. It's an unconventional way to do it. It lapses into conventionality more often than its critics said that it did, but it's still an unconventional way to do this, and it works perfectly to show not only Princess Margaret, but the whole of the modern royal family in a less reverential tone than is usually taken in royal biographies. And if you want a less reverential tone, ooh, have I got a book for you. Let me see if I can wedge this out of here. This is by Lady Colin Campbell, and it is The Queen Mother. It's her book about the Queen Mother, but this is not, for instance, we talked about William Shawcross's authorized biography of the Queen Mother. This is the exact opposite of that. This is all the gossip and all the backstairs sniggering and all of the rumors that went around. And not just about the royals, but about all the satellite families, noble families that are always interconnected with them and all around them. And it is incredibly gripping reading. Imagine someone with just a hair less narrative talent than, for instance, Georgette Heyer, and none of that author's scruples. And you get a book like this, which is terrific and dishes the dirt. I wrote a really fun review of this thing. If I remember when I'm posting this video, I'll try and find that review. I've been having a hard time finding some reviews of mine lately. It's kind of a disarming thing. There's a certain amount of comfort in the age-old threat the internet never forgets. There's a certain amount of comfort in that if you write for a living. But I'm finding it's not 100% true. The internet can indeed forget things, but I will try. And then, as long as we're on the subject of the Queen Mother, let's stick with queens who are interesting. We will go. This is the book that I mentioned yesterday. I was talking about James Pope Hennessy's biography, his authorized biography of Queen Mary. And I mentioned at the time that there was a kind of a shadow account of that, a backstairs account of how that book was made. And that's this. Hugo Vickers edited this. This is The Quest for Queen Mary. And this is all of the stories that Pope Hennessy couldn't include in his authorized biography. It's a whole bunch of backstage information about how he got those stories and who was telling them and why. And it is a wonderful companion to that authorized biography. So I thought I'd include that. And also that authorized biography, if some of you have expressed worry to me over the years, and especially since yesterday's video, about my admitted sweet tooth for authorized biographies. I do like them. I enjoy not only usually the unparalleled access that the author had, but also I like the Kremlinology of trying to figure out what the author is trying to hint at in the things that they cannot say in an authorized biography. I like that the kind of games that authors are playing. If, for instance, they are authorized to write a biography of somebody, but that somebody's literary estate does want to impose conditions. Most people don't. Most literary estates don't. Despite the reputation that they have, most of them will say, they will hire an authorized biographer and say, here's all the material, write whatever you want. The chips fall where they may. We're not going to try and guide this narrative. That is not always the case. There are some very famous examples where it isn't. The Kennedy family, for instance, and William Manchester. But usually that is the case. The guardian of a literary estate will say, now that we've vetted you and we like your work, you write your book. We're not going to try to dictate the shape of the thing. Some of you have nevertheless worried. I understand that. Authorized biographies are often dry. They often feel like the author has someone reading over their shoulder, even if the author doesn't. And they're often very long. So I thought I'd recommend another Queen Mary biography. As you could tell, Queen Mary is a bit of a favorite of mine. I think she's utterly fascinating. And her mother even more so, but there hasn't been a good biography of her mother in quite some time. And I'm aided in that fascination by the fact that for NaNoWriMo one year I wrote a novel about Queen Mary. But this is Anne Edwards' book, Matriarch. It's another biography of Queen Mary, and is also very, very good. And a number of you asked me, do I have to read the authorized biography in order to read about this figure? No, you don't. This will do just fine. This is also really good. There aren't many other examples of good Queen Mary biographies. And if you want to stick with the big authorized one by Pope Hennessy, you might be advised to find a cheap copy of this online, a used copy of The Quest for Queen Mary, and read them together. Because together they really are kind of the final word. And then, speaking of the final word, we'll finish this up. This doesn't have to be long. This is just an addendum to yesterday. The last thing that I want to recommend here is a biography of Queen Elizabeth II. This is by Sarah Bradford, the one who did the biography of George VI yesterday. This is her big biography of Elizabeth II. And the reason I recommended Ben Pimlott's biography of Queen Elizabeth II, but obviously a number of you were wondering, well, why didn't you recommend any biographies of King Charles? When he was Prince Charles, when he was Prince of Wales, why didn't you recommend any of those? There was a book called The Man Who Would Be King. Jonathan Dibbley did a book about a big, fat biography of Prince Charles. And just recently, Sally Bedell Smith did a biography of Prince Charles that I reviewed for the Christian Science Monitor. I didn't recommend any of those. I could, but one of the reasons why I didn't do that, the Dibbley book is really good on Prince Charles, and actually so is The Man Who Would Be King. I would buy a copy of that if it showed up at the Brattle in a heartbeat. But the reason why I didn't recommend any of those is fairly obvious, right? The most important thing in Prince Charles's life, King Charles's life, just happened yesterday. So necessarily all of the previous biographies of him feel like preludes. So if you're a completist, if you love reading about the House of Windsor, fine. But if for a starter kit, well, the starter's gun on biographies of that figure started yesterday. So in 2 years or 3 years, someone will comb through the Royal Archives and come out with a big, fat biography of King Charles III. It will be authorized, and it will be very much invigilated. Someone will be watching over the shoulder. Queen Elizabeth II didn't care about such things, but Charles does. So there'll be a big official biography of him, I'm sure, and I'm sure it will happen before he dies. But in the meantime, the Prince Charles books didn't feel like anything that I could recommend if I was trying to go right at the heart of the matter. And something like that also applies to Queen Elizabeth biographies. because she was, like, for instance, aside from the two rather wretched biographies of her that came out earlier this year, no biography of hers will look at Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, COVID, Brexit. Those are major things, and they won't be in any of these older biographies. So I do recommend this. It is very good, and a lot of these Queen Elizabeth II biographies that you're going to get from Sarah Bradford or whoever will cover a lot of the same ground up until the Annus Horribilis, and up until the Queen's palace burned. That's usually where such books will stop or start to diverge down rabbit holes or whatnot, usually about the princes. So it's a tempered recommendation. If you see a paperback copy of Sarah Bradford's biography of Queen Elizabeth, then definitely get it, because in terms of readability, it's really good. But for Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Charles and now King Charles, the books aren't out yet. Is the simplest way to put it, but not for the rest of these. Not for Queen Mary, for instance. So there's a few more Windsor recommendations for you. Just while I was looking at this bookcase anyway, I came over here to sort of pull down books and poke through them. When I was sort of absorbing the news that there is a king now in England, and that the Queen who was there for the 20th century is gone. While I was absorbing that news, I came over here and I was sort of poking at this bookcase, and I automatically started broadening my poking from the House of Windsor to just everything in general. Well, like, for instance, when I'm looking at these books on the shelf, who's missing? Who don't I have biographies of that I should? So that I was up here anyway. I was looking at these things anyway, so I thought I'd make another video. So there you go. A few more books to recommend to you if you come across them. I don't think any of them are in print at the moment, so I'm really helpful, aren't I? but I will wrap this up for now, and I promise no more Windsor videos. I will be back.